We're learning the Maimer Basi Lagani Tavshin Chav. We're in the middle of Sif Hey. So the Rabbi here begins with the inyan of Morabu Masecha and Magodlu Masecha. And he explains that Penigayat to the Nefroim that exist by Oretz, the Pasuk says Morabu Masecha. Penigayat to the Nefroim that exist by Shamayim, it says Magodlu Masecha. I mentioned yesterday that it seems like that the inyan of Morabu Masecha could go both on the Nefroim that exist here by Oretz and also the stars and everything that exists by Shamayim. And Magodlu Masecha goes only on what exists by Shamayim. I began listening to the Sikha that the Rebbe said right before the Maimer. I didn't hear the whole thing yet, but there the Rebbe says that Morabu Masecha is Dafka, here, the Tzva HaOretz, not in the Tzva Shamayim. Just like you see, B'negei Doimim Tzemeh Chai Medaber, that the lower you go, the more the vision and the numbers get greater and greater. That's what the Rebbe said. By people, there's whatever number of people there are, whatever billions of people. Then when you go to Chai, the numbers are greater. You go to Tzemech, the numbers are even greater. When you go to the Daimim, all the pieces of sand, the number is mamish kamat like what we see at least. It's endless, but it's not really endless. But in other words, that's where the real marabama is. Oh, good morning. The lower you go. Whereas by Shamayim, apparently the Tzva Shamayim, the stars don't have that level of marabu that there is in the sand, that there is in the earth below. So therefore marabu goes dafke on the Tzva HaOretz. Mashenke and the Magodlu, the greatness, the great Nevroim, that goes dafke on the Tzva Shamayim. What's the greatness of the Tzva Shamayim? So the Rebbe here brings from the Rebbe Maharash, we're on page Yudzayin. The Rebbe brings from the Rebbe Maharash that you pick up your eyes and look what's going on in Shamayim, and you'll see how great these creations of the Eibishter are. And the main thing is Ishle Neder, that there's nothing that's there that goes missing, so to speak. They remain there from the time of creation, and from that you'll come to have the real recognition of the Eibishter. And the question we finished off with is that the Rebbe Marash says that Shema Yisrael Avaylekena Vayachod, Shema is Rosh Tevish Su'u Mara Menechem. It's this is Bainanus, by looking at the greatness of creation, by looking at the Tzva Shemayim, that will bring you to the emissary recognition of Avayachod, of the real Achdus of the Eibishter. Yes.
When we talk about a person that understands that everything's indifferent, and that there's people, somebody who really knows Chassidus, and it's out of bottle here. We try to come to the point where we say this is all Kashmir. Kashmir is nothing.
Right.
That it's irrelevant. So even by that person, I mean, it says Kol Echad Yisrael.
Yeah. It refers even to that person. Yes. Because Saf, as we'll see, the point of this Bainanus is to see the Eibishter as being Ein Sof. And this, that the Eibishter is Ein Sof, is reflected in the Bria itself. The Eibishter being Ein Sof is not only somewhere out there in Atzilus or higher than Atzilus, Lifnei Atzimtzum. That Ein Sof and Ein Letchila of the Eibishter is reflected in the Bria. So even for the greatest tzaddik, this is the whole kavanah, to find Ein Sof in the Bria itself. Where do you see Ein Sof in the Bria? That's the real Magodlu. As we'll see, the Rebbe will explain. The real Magodlu is Ein Sof. If there's anything that's Hashem. Sure. So if there's something which is great, but it's not Ein Sof, so how could you say Godlu? It's not Be'emes great. It has a size. It could be measured. Magodlu, the emes of Magodlu is Tinishdag Rester. There's nothing greater than this, which is really Ein Sof. And this Ein Sof you could see in Tzva Shamayim. And from this Ein Sof that you see in Tzva Shamayim, you come to the recognition, the Havaya Echad, that it must be that the source of this Ein Sof comes only from the Achdus Pshuta, of the true Achdus of the Eibishter himself. That's where the Maim is going to here.
It comes from Sumar and Tzva Shamayim, and not.
You're right. Correct. Dafka from Tzva Shamayim, yeah. Correct. There's also his Bainanus Benegei to Gashmi. So we'll come back to that. But first, it starts off. There's two things here, right? There's the Magodlu Masecha, the lashon of the pasuk Su'u Mara Menechem, and then from there, actually, the point is to bring it down and to apply what you see above to the table or whatever you see here below in this world. Okay, so we're holding where it says Nemaimer Umavayr B'zeh. Yeah, in the paragraph of Inyanu, where it says Umavaya B'zeh. Umavaya B'zeh, so the Rebbe Marash explains as follows. Shal Yideisu Mara Meinechem, when a person lifts up his eyes to the heavens, Shazui Ha His Bainanos, B'tzva Shamayim. This refers to a person contemplating what he sees in the creations and all the stars and everything else that exists in the sky. Regarding them it says, how great is the Eibishter's creation. So what happens through this? This brings him a proof, not only regarding what exists by Shamayim, but actually regarding what exists here below. That even everything that's created here in the earth below, this is the famous word that Chassidus says, that what exists here below, every individual creation, doesn't last forever. But the min, the species that the Eibishter created, do. Right? Even though you can ask the Shaila, there are certain things that go extinct. Okay, whatever the answer to that question is. But this is the word that Chassidus says. That here below we see that there's a kiyum, the min ha'anushi has a kiyum. Whatever different minim that there are amongst the chayis, so the min has a kiyum forever. And the same thing with tzemeach and daimim. So the min has a kiyum, but ish, that every individual existence has a kiyum forever, that doesn't exist here in this world. So therefore, it doesn't say regarding creation here in this world, below magodlu, that how great it is. Elarak morabu, that over here you see the mile of the ribuv, the multitude and multitude of creations. L'mayla and shamayim, what's the chiddush? Every individual star, the sun, the moon, everything individually is kayamim be'ish. It remains as it was from the time of creation. Not only it still exists today, but exists with the same taikif that it was from the time of creation. There's the lashon that's brought in Chassidus b'negei to the bria, that it says b'negei to a person actually that's born. A child that's born, from the moment he's born, he already begins getting weaker and weaker until the day that he passes away. Anything that exists in the world, so by nature, it ages, and it slowly gets less and less energy to it, less and less chayas, and it withers away eventuully. Mashen Kain, the Tzva Shamayim, you see the Eibusha created them away from Kazeh, that they exist, and they continue existing without any shinui whatsoever for all the thousands of years from creation. So that's the chiddush you see by Shamayim. But from what we see by Shamayim, the point here is, it brings us a hichacha to what's going on here ba'aretz. That the kiyum of all the minim that exist here ba'aretz is also similar to what we see by Shamayim. Okay, so now hine, the chiddush here is that gam bahem, even over here below in this world, yeshnoi inyan bli gvul. You have this koyach of bli gvul in the world below, ba'aretz. Va'ad bli gvul b'poil. There's actual bli gvul here ba'aretz, not just the potential for bli gvul, but actual bli gvul. So now, the Rebbe doesn't tie Shadais Beferish, but this is the point that I was saying here. What's the Magodlu? Magodlu refers to the Tzva Shamayim. They exist, b'teikif, with a kiyum, every single ish. That's an expression of Kayach Abli Gvul. Every creation naturally is a hoiva, has been created, and it's nifsat. Lashon the Rambam says it constantly deteriorates. The fact that you see that there's a creation that doesn't is because there's a Kayach Abli Gvul in them. And therefore it continues endlessly. Every individual creation, be'ish. The fact that here below in the world we don't see this, so over here you don't have the same koyach habli gvul as it is lamayla. But if you see that koyach habli gvul in the tzva shamayim, this will bring you a hichacha that even below there's also a koyach habli gvul. How does that bring you a hichacha? How does what we see by shamayim bring a hichacha to what exists about it? The Rebbe explains this. Now you understand what's going on here?
I want to hear.
Okay, so this better be a good echacha.
Doesn't mean the min. He's saying what? Because we just said the min, the last verse. That
correct.
That would be bli gvul also. Maybe
that's bli gvul. Correct. Yeah, let's see. So the pshat here is as follows: Hine lo haya ratzna beire shiyeh ki ma'ilmus ad bli tachlis. If it was the Eibishter's will that the world should continue going without an end, that everything that there is in the world should go without not just 6,000 years, but it should continue going endlessly. Azai, hoysam shachas v'yitzias hanevroim ha'aretz. So then everything that's growing and coming out from the earth, So then it would exist in the eifin of with bligvul, k'meshikasav eretz mimenu yetze, that from the ground comes out all the vegetation and everything that grows. And actually it says even more, ultimately everything gets its chayis from the earth. Not only the tzimeach that grows directly from the earth, but all the animals and even the human beings could only live and grow from the chayis of the things that grow from the earth. So if the Eibusher's desire was that it should continue bligvul, so then imsheches ba'ifin shel bligvul, it would continue to go in the eifin of bligvul. In other words, what's the Rebbe saying here? We see this kayach of growth, of tzimeach, that comes from the earth, that it's something that continues forever without any stop. Another year, another generation, another 1,000 years. From the time of Briyas Ha'olam, this kayach hatzimeach ba'aretz is something that continues non-stop. And one seed, you plant it, and it grows a tree, and then you take other seeds, and you plant that, and it grows another tree. There's no end to this. Forever. Elamai, but poyal mamish, it's something which is mugbal, because the world only exists for 6,000 years. And besides that, what do we see right now? We see right now that this individual tree that I plant does not exist forever. This tree is going to exist for 100 years, or whatever number of years it's going to exist, and then there'll be another tree. And that tree will also exist for a certain number of years, and then there'll be another tree. So what's kayam? What's kayam is only the min. This min of apple trees is going to continue forever. But this individual tree continues forever? No. So when I look at the individual things that grow from the aretz, what do I see? Gvul. Everything is limited of the amount of time of the chayas of its existence of what it has. But if I look at the kayach hatzimeach that comes from the aretz and therefore it continues going, the min continues coming from the aretz, that's something that if the ratzon habayra was that it should continue forever, we see this kayach hatzimeach that there's nothing that stops it. It continues going. It's similar to what it says in Chassidus Benegaya to the kayach ha'ilada. Same thing regarding the kayach ha'ilada. That the kayach ha'ilada that exists in the world, the kayach to give birth, is a kayach of ein seif. One generation, another generation, ein seif. Mitzad, the inyan itself, there is nothing that stops it. It continues forever. Elamai, if you look, so let's see further inside. The Rabbi says, V'kiven sheme'aret zu haisam shachasan Evrayim ba'ayfin shal bligvul. So we see this nature that there is in the world, that the ground produces and grows from it creations of trees and whatever else, plants, endlessly. The ground has in it a power of ein seif and bligvul to create and grow endlessly. This is not actual bligvul. This is only a potential for bligvul. But we can't see here an actual inyan of bligvul. Because at any time in history, or right now, you look at whatever the ground produced here and now, it's something which could be counted. There's a number specifically of what there is. There's a certain number of trees that exist in the world right now, and not more. And those numbers of trees that exist today, in 20 years from now, there's going to be a different number because certain trees die off and there's new trees that grow. So in that sense, it's limited. So this is different. The Rebbe is taking the inyan of ish and min and showing you the difference between them. When you have something which is kayamim be'ish, if every individual nivra exists forever, so then look at this nivra right now. This nivra that you see today, in 1,000 years, it's still going to be there. In 2,000 and 3,000, it's still going to be there. So every individual nivra that you see is going forever. So that itself is the bligvul. Even by looking at by one specific one, you see in this the inyan of bligvul. Mashen came by the tzvah ha'aretz. You look at every individual nivra, you don't see any kayach of bligvul. But the fact that the earth that produces it is going to replace this tree that's going to die and continue going forever, so there's a potential for bligvul. The individual tree that I see here that it produced right now is not actual bligvul, but I see that there's a potential for bligvul here. So that's a bligvul b'koyach that I could see in the world. That's the first point. But the Rebbe is not satisfied with this. We want to try to prove that there's not just a koyach for bligvul, but there's a bligvul b'poil. There's an actual inyan of bligvul in the world. L'chayre that you don't see. You see it b'shamayim, but not ba'aretz. But the point was that if you see this koyach of bligvul, that it exists b'shamayim, it's muchach that koyach of bligvul exists ba'aretz as well. By the way, why is it muchach? Maybe let's just take a step back for a second. Maybe let's say like this. Maybe there's a koyach of bli gvul only b'shamayim and ba'aretz there isn't. Maybe not. The whole teichen of this maimer is that you can't say that. You can't divide and say, no, the koyach of bli gvul reaches up to shamayim, comes to aretz, the koyach of bli gvul doesn't reach there. That's against the whole piddush of milis of bli gvul. Bli gvul means that it's a koyach of ein sof, and therefore it's also mispashet ein sof. If it exists b'shamayim, it's because the Eibishter is ein sof, so he reaches, the koyach of ein sof of the Eibishter reaches even to the shamayim agashmiyim that he created in this world. So it has to reach in the aretz agashmiyim as well. There's nothing, why should it all of a sudden stop by the shamayim agashmiyim and by aretz agashmiyim? Here there's no bli gvul anymore. It can't be that way. Sof, who created this world? Going back, in a way, actually, the koyach habli gvul of the Eibishter, you may think that you should have the koyach habli gvul from the Eibishter reflected here in the earth below even more than Shemayim. What we learned before in the Maimer, that dafka, when it comes to the tzva aretz, that the Eibishter creates a physical yesh, gashmi, yesh ma'ayin, could only be created, how? From the very essence of the Eibishter himself, she'ein li'ili v'sibah shekad malai. So Chassidus always tells us, Adarabah, dafke ba'aretz is where you have the deepest koyach atzmos, the highest koyach of ein sof. Even more than ein sof, the koyach of ein leitchila. So if anything, not only is the aretz agashmi also included in the ein sof, dafke here, you see this koyach of ein sof to create this yesh agashmi. Right? So the point is, this koyach ein sof, it's not the pshat that the koyach ein sof is in one place, and now it's a question of whether we're going to find somewhere begili that we can see it. The fact that the koyach ein sof is nimshach lamata din tachlis is a davar poshet davar bara. That's the taich of what ein sof means. It's nimshach b'chol mokim. The chiddush of this maimer is, it's showing you that if you look at certain things, what happens in Lifnei Tzimtzum, what exists in Eilam Atzilus, and what's closer to us, if you'll pay attention and be mizbeinin in what's going on in Tzva Shemayim and even in Tzva Aretz, you'll be able to see this. You'll be able to recognize that there's actually the gilui of this koyach ein sof. The fact that it's there, we know it's there. That's the amunah we have. There's an Eibishter. There's a koyach ein sof. But you could actually even see it. So not only could it be seen in Tzva Shemayim, it could also be seen in Tzva Ha'aretz. If we see that it exists in Tzva Shemayim, so then we can take from what we see in Tzva Shemayim and interpret it in a way, and interpret what we see in Tzva Ha'aretz, that is, in a way that we should understand that this is really Koyach Ein Sof.
Tzva Shemayim is Aretz. It's one world. It's one.
Then a Chanami, true. You're right. And a lot of times the Chassidus, when it talks about Tzva Shemayim and Tzva Ha'aretz, so it's talking about Eilam Ruchniim versus Eilam Gashmiyim. But over here we're not. Correct. So we're talking about Gashmi is the Geshemayim and the Gashmi is the Ga'aretz. But there's still a difference though. There's still a difference because Tzva Shemayim, even the Gashmi is the Geshemayim, relative to the physical Aretz, the daimim that exist for Aretz, are considered to be more ruchnisdige beings. The Rambam in Hilchos Yesod Yatayr speaks about the fact that the Kechavim and the Shemesh and the Levana and the Kechavim are Balei Deya, and they're Nivraim which are on a high level. I mean, the Lashon that was brought earlier in the Maimer, Sichlim HaNivdalim. Who's that referring to? Sichlim HaNivdalim, could be it refers to the Malachim actually, or it could be it even refers to these, the Shemesh and the Yereach are called Sichlim HaNivdalim. They're big Balei Deya. Right, so in that sense, they're more ruchnisdige existence than what exists here below. Yeah. Okay.
But in a way, the koyach ein sof, the happens in the koyach of Tzemech, exists here on earth.
Dafke ba'aretz, right.
That's the way that the Rabbi explains it. Koyach Tzemech, it's not the seed which is growing, but the seed is just
being ma'orer, the koyach hatzemeach that exists ba'aretz. So you see the koyach hatzemeach, dafke ba'aretz. You don't have a koyach hatzemeach b'shamayim.
Why can't you say that the earth, like over here, it shows the koyach habivol in Bligvol?
The Bligvol, Ingvol.
Yeah,
So that's what the Rebbe is going to address right now. Let's see. Could you have Bligvol, Ingvol? Let's see what the Rebbe says here. Okay, so far we have the conclusion that we can see a potential for Bligvol in this world. An actual Bligvol we don't see in the world. But the fact that the world has this koyach hatzimeach of ein sof, that itself is a potential for bligvol. Elo she'inyin zeu rak bekoyach v'loi bepoil ki b'chol rega sefer memoitzim dova mugbal. So that you see, b'payil, what you see in this world, everything is limited. However, v'neisef lezeh, in addition to this, we must say that the truth is, yeshne game inyan de bligvul b'payil. There must be an actual koyach of bligvul here in the world. If we can see that there's a potential for bligvul, that the nature or the earth is of such that it could produce endlessly, it must be that there's an actual koyach of bligvul. This is not just a theoretical possibility. That b'poil mamish, it's not bligvul. Elamai b'koyach, it has in it, there's nothing stopping it. B'koyach, it has a potential of bligvul. A potential of bligvul means that this is the nature of the earth, that it has a potential for bligvul. If it has a potential for bligvul, there must be that there's an actual koyach of bligvul in it. Why is this? So the Rebbe says a very pashut thing. Because you'll ask the question, how would it be possible that afila in the bligvul b'koyach b'vad, even if it was only a potential for bligvul, a power of bligvul, how could you have this here in this world? Sherei Yedua, the famous klal is known. She'inyin shehu bligvul ene yachal lavei bahal basha b'dava mugbal. You can't have a koyach of bligvul that is enclosed and is contained by something which is limited. So if you're going to say that the world, the Oretz, is outside the Koyach HaEin Seif of the Eibishter, the Gili of Ein Seif of the Eibishter, stops B'Shamayim. That Koyach HaEin Seif does not reach down Ba'Oretz. Elamai, nevertheless, the Oretz itself is outside of the Bli Gvul, it's Mugbul, and then in this Gvul of Oretz, there's a potential for Bli Gvul. If you're going to say that that's the Pshat, then it's impossible. How could the world, which is outside of the Koyach HaEin Seif of the Eibishter, it's Mugbul, have a potential of Bli Gvul? The creation here, when he says Bria Kula, the Rebbe is referring here to the Bria below, the Oretz. If you're going to say that this Oretz here below is absolute Gvul, from whichever angle you're going to look at it, this is an inyan of Gvul. So then, you cannot have contained in it a unlimited power to create and to produce the koyach hatzemeach ba'aretz endlessly. Even a potential for bli gvul will not be possible to be contained in the world here below. So if you see in the world that there's a potential for bli gvul, so it must be that there's an actual koyach of bli gvul. The Ein Seif of the Eibishter that comes down the Mata Ba'aretz actually exists here in the world below. It doesn't stop by Shemayim. The Koyach Ein Seif of the Eibishter is here below. Umemele, it's reflected by the fact that there's a potential for Bli Gvul Ba'aretz. But Payol, the Ratzon HaBeire, the Ratzon of the Eibishter was that Koyach Ein Seif, which is present in the world, should not be Nizgala. But Payol, it's not revealed and it does not produce things that exist Be'ish Ein Seif. But nevertheless, the fact that there's a potential of Bli Gvul in the world means that it's mitzad the koyach ha'ein seif that's actually here, that is containing, so to speak, this koyach of Bli Gvul. Gvul cannot contain Bli Gvul. Yeah, okay. So therefore, what's the conclusion of all this? That even though in the world below, the things that we see in the world that are so many and many are only kayamim b'min, it's not kayamim b'ish, not every individual b'riya continues forever, but nevertheless, we can see the potential for Bli Gvul in the world. And if there's a potential for Bli Gvul, it must be that there's an actual koyach ha'ein seif that exists in the world. Elamai, the Eibishter decided that Bashamayim, there should be an actual Bli Gvul, that each individual star that exists should continue forever. Mashenkin ba'aretz, the Eibishter decided, no, that there shouldn't be an actual Bli Gvul. But be'etzem, the inyan of Bli Gvul exists Bashamayim and it exists ba'aretz. Now, just to finish off with one point, always it's nice to finish off with a question. So it might seem like that this concept that Bashamayim, the creation exists, you have an actual Bli Gvul be'ish, and ba'aretz you don't. It's only a Bli Gvul b'min, it's only a potential Bli Gvul. So it might seem like sort of a random thing, and a random. The Eibishter decided so. Theoretically, the Eibishter, which is Ein Seif, exists Bashamayim, exists ba'aretz. There should be no difference between Shamayim and Aretz. Mitzad Koyach Ein Seif. Elamai, the Eibishter decided, b'Shamayim it should be Bli Gvul, and ba'aretz it shouldn't. Stam randomly. It's not random. Obviously, it's not a random thing. I mean, the very fact that Shamayim is Shamayim and Aretz is Aretz. Shamayim is more of a Ruchnizik creation, and Aretz is more of a Gashmizik creation. is one and the same point with saying that Shemayim, there's actual bli gvul, in the fact that everything that exists there is Kayim forever. And Ba'aretz, you don't have that. The inyan of bli gvul b'poyel is expressed in a more ruchniziga place. Over here, begashmius, because it's lower, so therefore there's only a potential for bli gvul. But the b'poyel of bli gvul is not revealed, because it's more megushim, it's lower. But the emes is that we can see from the actual, from the potential bli gvul in the world, that there has to be a koyach ein sof here in this world. So this is the isbainus. The su'u mara meinechem, the isbainus is, if you lift up your eyes and you see the koyach bli gvul l'mayla, this will bring you to the conclusion about the koyach bli gvul that exists here ba'aretz. Okay, there's a deeper hezbollah for this. There's more to it. We're in the middle of the subject. We'll continue next week in Mitzvah Shem. When the Maimer Basi Legani Tavshechav Beis in Seif Hey on page Yud Ches, we're holding 3 lines from the top. Fishel Mevayer. So the Maimer speaks about Eirein Seif Adein Tachlis. If you haven't noticed yet, the whole subject of the Maimer is to explain how the bli gvul, the koyach ein seif of the Eibishter, and not stam koyach ein seif. The emes inyan of ein seif, the way it is only by the Eibishter himself, is something that is extended down, lower and lower, and you can see it in the lowest levels. Lamata adin tachlis, and the creation in the world below. So the last thing that we learned about is the inyan of Marabba Masecha, Magodla Masecha, that if you look at creation, so you see the Ein Seif of the Eibishter. When you look at the Tzvah Shamayim, so you see that they're Kayamim Be'ish, that they exist and they don't get their power, their existence does not get diminished, it does not get in any way changed over time. When you look at the Tzvah Ha'aretz, you look at things in this world, so it's Kayamim B'min, even though things do constantly change and so on, but nevertheless you can see that there's the koyach that exists in this world for things to go on forever. The koyach hatzemeach that exists ba'aretz, the koyach ha'hilada that exists in the world is something that goes on forever. Elamai, but poyel mamish, things don't exist forever. So if you want to count every individual tree or every individual fruit that grows, you can see the number of what it is. But we can see that there's a koyach hatzemeach that's here in the world, at least potentially, that goes on non-stop. There's nothing to stop it. So the Rabbi made a point here, the last thing we learned, that if you can see a koyach of bli gvul in the world, there has to be also a hamshacha of oirein seif b'poyel here in this world. Because if the world itself was, so to speak, outside of the koyach ein seif of the Eibishter, so how could there be a koyach of bli gvul here, even potentially? There has to be a hamshacha of the oirein seif of bli gvul here in this world. And therefore, it's expressed by the fact that there is a potential, there's a koyach for bli gvul that we could see even ba'aretz, even below in this world. So in short, the point is, the isbainus of su'u mare meinechem, when you see the bli gvul b'poyel that exists in the tzvah shamayim, that brings you the hechacha, that brings you the proof regarding what's going on ba'aretz, that even ba'aretz there really is a koyach of bli gvul that exists in this world.
Why isn't there proof that Adam Rishon was supposed to live forever?
Yeah.
That should be the thing, that in Gashmis itself, unless he was in a higher level than the present.
In Gan Eden, in a different darga.
Unless the Rabbi
We're trying to bring a raya from 5782, from something that exists today, here, alive, right now. Chayda. Okay, let's continue inside. The Rabbi Marash, this is based on what the Rabbi Marash explains. The third line from the top of page 8, Yud Ches. So the Rabbi Marash explains, Sherroyim, we can see that the infinite power of the Eibishter is here in actuality, in creation. Not just the potential for it, but you see b'poyel a bli gvul in Nevroim. If the power of the Eibishter in creation was a limited power, it was a koyach of gvul, that there is Lamaila as well. So if only koyach hagvul would be here, enclosed in creation, to create and give chayis to what exists, and the bli gvul of the Eibishter only remains in potential, and there's no actual expression, there's no actual hamshacha of this koyach bli gvul, azai hayitzarech liyes chiluk ba nevraim ben hayoyim shenivru layomim shel achrei zeh. we should see a change in creation, in the things that are created, the day that are created, and the following days. There should be some kind of a change in their existence, in their strength, and so on. What does it say in Yerushalmi? Ala Posik. That these are the descendants, or these are all the things that exist in heaven and earth. Bihi Badam, what does Bihi Badam mean? Kiyoimi Badam, like the day they were created. Hainu Shem Chazakim Kiyoimi Badam, they are as strong as they are on the day that they were created. But Oisei Teike V'Chayzet Shahayu Biyoimi Badam, with the same strength, with the same existence, like the day they were created, they have the exact same strength today. So Bihi Badam refers to every day. Behi, like they were on the day of creation. Beli shini klal, without any change whatsoever. So in this Yerushalmi, it doesn't seem like he's talking here specifically about Toldos HaShamayim. Right? Earlier in the Maimer he brought the difference between Shamayim, Tzva Shamayim, and Tzva Oretz. Tzva Shamayim are Kayamim Be'ish. You can see there how every individual thing created is strong and stays as is. Tzva Oretz, there's a change constantly. You see things that are deteriorating. But over here in this Yerushalmi, he's teaching the pasuk Eile Toldos Hashamayim v'ha'aretz b'hibadam, that you could see this both in heaven and earth, that things are created and remain b'li shini klal as they were on the day of creation.
Last week when you said that you said the child starts drying up.
Correct. True, and a chanami. So maybe he's referring to other things that exist here, ba'aretz. You look at the daimim, take a look at a rock that the Eibusha created, and you see that it exists and it stays the exact same as it was from the day of creation. So maybe that's what it refers to. In Tzimeyach, you constantly see changes, and same in Chai and in Medaber. But in the daimim, it's the same thing. You do have places where you had volcanoes or other things that have affected the place and the position, and but at the vast majority of the daimim that exists in the world is exactly the way it was, kihi bottom. So just like the stars and everything else that exists for Shamayim is the same. It's the same here, but it's also. Maybe that's what it's referring to. I don't know. Shezeu inyan nitzchiyis. So this is the eternity of creation. Ubezen niker sha'kayach habli gvul nimshach ba'nevroim gam b'payil. So you see from all of this that the kayach habli gvul of the Eibishter is drawn down into creation, even b'payil. You can see it expressed b'payil mamish, the kayach habli gvul that's here in the world, both in Shamayim and in Oretz. Okay, but usually in Chassidus it does say that this inyan of the kayach ha'ein saif, that it exists by nitzchi, you see it be'ikir in Shamayim, in the tzva Shamayim, in the things that are in the sky. Over here in the world below, the way this world functions, begashmius, be'aretz, we can see how things are constantly changing and deteriorating and so on. Elamai, from tzva Shamayim, we could understand that it's also true b'negei to tzva ha'aretz. Okay, let's continue. The Rebbe has a shaila on this. And the premise of the whole entire inyan over here. However, the question here is as follows. Seemingly we would be able to say that maybe this whole inyan has a different pshat. The fact that we see that everything that exists in the world is the same and it's as strong as it was on the day it was created. Who says that that's a proof for the fact that there has to be an unlimited power of the Eibishter that's here enclosed in this thing that's created and exists eternally? Maybe the pshat is different. Even without this kayach of bligvul, it would be possible to say that so you could have this inyan of everything being as strong as on the day of creation. Why? Because creation is constantly repeating itself. The Eibishter is recreating every single thing, every single moment. So you can never say the age of this thing or the age of this world or whatever is so and so. It's not the age; it doesn't age because by emes the Eibishter creates everything every single moment. The Eibishter creates the words of Hashem are standing there in the heavens the way it was on the first day of creation, and every single moment the Dvar Havaya has to recreate everything. So instead of saying the pshat is that the Eibishter creates it once, and then we can see that kayach habli gvul is there, and therefore it exists eternally, say differently. that the Eibusher creates it every single moment. So there's no Rai B'chlal that this Koyach HaBli Gvul over here. Yeah, so but the thing is though, this hesbah that the Rebbe is saying here would leave us with a question. If in fact the Eibusher creates everything, every single rega, and that's the reason why things that Hashem just created, and that doesn't age at all. It's chazak and kiyemi bottom. It's fresh, brand new. So then why is it that we find many things in the world that do deteriorate? In this world, most things are deteriorating. They do age by nature. The Eibusher just created it. So what happened? So that would not answer this question. Okay, another point there, if you think about what the Rebbe is saying here, this question, what's the Rebbe in essence asking here? This word that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, of Loilam Avayit Dvar Chanitza B'Shamayim, that the Eibusher has to recreate every single thing, every single moment. The word of the Baal Shem Tov, really. What's the pshat in this word? What's the reason for this? Why does the Eibusher have to create everything every single moment? So the hesber of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, in Shar Yichud V'Amunah, is that there's a difference when you create something yesh ma'ayin, or when you create something yesh miyesh. When you take a material and you form it into a piece of furniture or whatever it is, so even before you formed it in that shape, it potentially was able to be formed that way. It has it in its nature and from the beginning. You're not really adding anything that wasn't there. You're just giving it a tzura. So therefore it exists this way from before, and it's not a chiddush. So it could exist without you constantly being there to maintain that shape and that existence. Whereas when it comes to yesh ma'ayin, because yesh ma'ayin is something which is heipach hateva, it's supposed to be ayin, and creating a yesh is heipach its metzias. So therefore this is something that the Eibusher has to create every single moment. So this is the hezbollah that Chassidus gives. Why is Alter Rebbe speaking about this? To explain that the world that exists is be'emes not an independent existence at all. The world is bottled by Metzias. Why? Because it's a yesh ma'ayin, and every single moment the Eibusher is recreating it, and without that creation of every single moment, it would not be here. So in essence, it means that on its own, it's non-existent. That's the famous hesber of the Alter Rebbe, benegeh to why the hishavos has to be b'chol rega v'rega. So in essence, what the Alter Rebbe is saying is that the world is bottled by Metzias. Right? That's the point. Okay, so now, if so, what's the Rebbe asking here? What the Rebbe is asking here is, when you see a world that's chazakim kiyayim hibaram, so you have two ways how to explain this concept. One way is to say, like we're saying here, that this is an expression of a koyach habli gvul that's invested in the world, that's here, present in the world, and that is expressed by the fact that you have an eternal existence. But you have another way how to explain it. Maybe explain it adarabah. It doesn't show that there's a koyach habli gvul in creation. Maybe it shows on the bittul oilamus that the world is so not independent b'chlal. If you have something that is an independent existence, so then it exists with its own nature and it deteriorates over time and it can't exist eternally. But if it's b'chatchila not a metzias for itself, there's a koyach of the Eibusher that's recreating it every single moment. So it's not a thing b'chlal. It's a garnish. It's nishkin zach. So it's a pella that it exists constantly and without a change. This lechatchila doesn't exist. It's the Eibusher that is perpetuating its existence and oifn of bli gvul because he's creating it this moment. So it's a sort of an opposite point. You're making the point that the world is batal betachlis, that the metzias is lechatchila not a metzias. It's the Eibusher that makes its metzias every moment. So what the Rebbe is asking is, why are we saying that there's oirein seif lemato adein tachlis, that you see an expression of the Eibusher in a mato, in a tachten, in a metzias of a nivra, that this metzias of a nivra exists eternally? Say punkt fakert. Say the fact that you see the world existing eternally proves that the world is not a metzias b'chlal, that there is no real tachten, because the tachten is l'chatchila not independent b'chlal. Maybe that's the pshat. So that's the chayda in essence what the Rebbe is asking here.
Say, this is the way the Hashem made it.
That what?
He made constantly this metzias, that it actually appears that it's not, in other words, the gvul is part of the ongoing process of creation.
That the Eibusher creates the gvul.
He creates it in such a way that that's how it appears on the outside.
Okay, so let's see the Rebbe's answer to this. So the answer for this is as follows. We must say we must say that there's a difference between the koyach of the Eibusher that's in the nifal, that's in every creation, as it was the first time when the Eibusher creates it in Sheishis Yimei Bereishis, The Chiddush HaYeshanois K'moi Shula Achrei Zeh. And this Varta, the Baal Shem Tov says that every single moment the Eibishter recreates everything, and this, the Rebbe says, is referred to as Chiddush HaYeshanos. The Eibishter is recreating something that was already created once before. We must say that there's a difference between the original and very first time the Eibishter creates it and the Chiddush HaYeshanos. In other words, although the Eibishter is mamish recreating it me'ayin ve'efes mamish. The famous word of the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, if the Eibishter would stop creating something for one moment, then it would return la'ayin ve'efes k'moi koidim sheish shemei b'reishis mamish, as if it never existed b'chlal. That's the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe. Hayais, even when it does exist, it doesn't exist independently. So if the Eibishter would be mevatlit, so then you would see that it never really existed. Right? So every single moment there's a new hishavos. The Eibishter is not just maintaining its existence. There's a new hishavos every single moment. But nevertheless, the Eibishter is creating something that already existed. And therefore it's Chiddush HaYeshanos. So we must say that the Chiddush HaYeshanos is not the same as creation in Sheish Yemei Bereishis when the Eibishter created it the first time. So the Rebbe brings here a raya from a medrash for this. The Rebbe does not explain. The Rebbe doesn't go into explaining the Teichen Inyan why this is so, but the Rebbe just proves it from a medrash. Sharei Yomru Razal, because the medrash says as follows: Sheshalu es. I forgot to check this up. Who this is? Ri. Okay, this could be various different names over here, whether it's Rabbi Yechanan or Rabbi Yitzchak or Rabbi Yehuda. I'm not sure. Okay, let's check up this medrash. So he was asked, "Lekame yomim bara kadosh baruch hu eselamei." So how many days did the Eibishter create his world in? Amalei l'shisha yomim, 6 days of creation. So he asked him, so mi'oz v'yadata, from then until today, mahu oisa. What is the Eibishter doing? That's it. He created the world, and now he's what is he busy with? Amalei yoshev u'mezavig zivogim. The Eibishter is busy making shidduchim. Making shidduchim keeps you busy long enough. Ask the Shadchanim, they'll tell you. Or anyone that's in the parsha of shidduchim, sometimes it seems to be endless. So the Eibishter is yeshiv u'mezavig zivugim.
So is marriage.
Yeah. It's a concept. It's his havas b'chol rega mechodesh, mezavig zivugim. Okay, so this is the medrash. Okay, so now all jokes aside, there's a real pshat in this medrash over here. The medrash here is saying that this havos that the Eibishter created is one time, Sheish Yemei Bereishis. After that, Kaviyachol, the world it maintains itself and it exists, it continues going along, and the Eibishter is not busy with it. So what is the Eibishter doing instead? He's mezavik zivugim. But this goes against the whole vart of what Baal Shem Tov says, that every single moment the Eibishter has to continue to create the world. Okay, I mean, obviously this medrash needs a pshat. What does this mean? That the Eibishter is busy, he's not busy, as if the Eibishter can't do two things at once, and the Eibishter is busy creating the world, so then he has what to do, and otherwise his time is empty. And what does this medrash mean? It needs a pshat, this medrash, but the Rebbe doesn't focus on explaining it. The Rebbe does bring a raya from this medrash to the point that he said before, in order to answer the contradiction here between the Vart of the Baal Shem Tov and what it says in this medrash that the Eibishter creates the world only once. So if we were to say that the Eibishter renews the creation every single moment, which is renewing what already existed, is the same as the Eibishter creating the world the first time. This question doesn't even begin b'chlal. What is the Eibishter doing now? Right? In other words, maybe you could say that he gave this whoever this was an apikaitis, or that he gave him a foolish answer. But that's not even an answer a question that deserves an answer b'chlal. What kind of a question if the Eibishter is actually creating the world every single moment? So from this medrash it's clear shechidush hayeshanos einay oisei oifen amshacha k'may shahaya b'sheish yemei bereishis. It's not the same amshacha. The Eibishter creating the world again does not take his involvement, so to speak, in the same way that it does the first time. And therefore the Eibishter could be occupied with something else which is not creating the world. Making shidduchim. That's the raya that you see over here from this medrash. Okay, like I said, the Rebbe does not explain the etzem minyan. What's taka the pshat in the etzem minyan? What's the difference between creation the first time and creation that's Chiddush HaYeshanis? If you're going to tell me that Eibush is just maintaining existence, that the Ashkacha Pratis or the Chayas in the world and so on, fine. So we understand that it's different. But if it's actually a new creation every single moment, Ma'ayin V'Afis Mamish, so then what does it mean that it's different? Why is it different? And not only that, if you medayik here, in the lashon of the Maimer, there's a chiddush over here, because b'pashtus you would say, what's the difference between the first time and every other time, which is chiddush hayeshanos? The difference is not mitzad the involvement of the creator, of the Eibishter. The difference is mitzad the creation that already exists. There's two things, there's the poyel and there's the nifal, the lashon that the Maimer here uses. Maybe the difference between the chiddush the first time and the chiddush every other moment following that is only legabi the nifal, legabi the nivra. The first time the nivra appeared, yesh ma'ayin. But now after that, this nivra that the Eibishter created, yesh ma'ayin, so like he was saying before, I think this is what he was saying, this nivra that the Eibishter created, he created with a certain nature. The Eibishter created a tree on the first day of creation. Now that very tree that he created has a certain nature that it will grow fruits and it will go through seasons and it will deteriorate after a certain number of years. It was created not just as a metzius of a tree, it was created as a metzius of a tree with all of the nature that it has. And then later when the Eibishter continues creating it, so you can't say that, because the Eibishter is creating B'chol Rega, so the tree is not going to change, it's not going to age, it's not going to go through seasons. No, what do you mean? Of course the Eibishter is creating B'chol Rega, but what is he creating B'chol Rega? He's creating the tree B'chol Rega, and the tree is the tree with all of its nature. So therefore in that sense, it's Chiddush HaYeshanis, the very first time this tree came into existence. But after that, he is maintaining the existence of the tree with its nature that it already has. In that sense, it's only maintaining something that already exists. Yeah, and a Chanami, they was just recreating it every single moment because nothing could exist independently on its own. However, it doesn't take away from the fact that this Nivra has a nature of its own. That what? Like
time.
Like the existence of time also. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So the point over here is, if we're looking for a hesber, why things that were created are strong and have the same power as they were from the moment they were created, the same exact thing today as well. So you can't tell me because the Eibishter creates it every single moment. What do you mean the Eibishter creates it? Of course he creates it every single moment. But every single moment he's creating the existence with its nature, which has a teva to deteriorate. That's the teva of a nivra, that it's a nifsad, the lashon of the Rambam that I've quoted before. So therefore, there's no hesber by saying that the Eibishter creates it every single moment. That's l'chayre what the pshat would be here.
I mean, isn't the whole concept of the first time and then the future after times? That's only for our perception anyway. Time is just a part of creation also.
Right.
So it's all of it's happening at the same moment. Just
okay, but I hear what you're saying. But look, the existence of time and the existence of all of nature is not just a perception, it's a real metzius that the Eibishter created.
According to us.
It is a real metzius, that this is the raya that Chassidus brings from the fact that there's Torah and mitzvahs. If not for Torah and mitzvahs, then we could say that the whole world is a perception of reality. Maybe the aspect of independence, the pirud aspect, that we feel separated and that I'm here and I'm self-sufficient, that is definitely just a perception and a lie, and a big lie. But the fact that the Welt is a Metzius, with all of the nature that it has, is a Metzius amitis al pi Torah. Torah is telling you to do Torah mitzvahs based on all of these natures. If you're going to eat matzah on Sukkot and shake lulav on Pesach, and you're going to say that time is a perception, so you won't mekayim the mitzvahs. I mean, the world is a Metzius, amitis, that the Eibishter created. The point I'm trying to say over here is that l'chayre, the pashta answer to the question of the Rebbe, that we see chazak and kiyemi bara. So you might say that this is because of the hishavas b'chol rega. The hishavas b'chol rega can't explain that, because the hishavas b'chol rega is the chiddush hayeshanos. If it's a chiddush hayeshanos, so that means that the Eibishter is recreating the reality that exists with its nature, and its nature is to deteriorate. So how is that a hesber for the fact that it's chazak and kiyemi bara? Elamai, it must be a koyach, a bligvul that there is in the world. That's l'chayre the hesber. But that's not what it says here in the Maimer. So maybe it's a nice hesber that I just said, but it's not what the Rebbe is saying here. Because if that's the hesber, so then how does this medrash come in there? The medrash is not talking about the nivra. The medrash is talking about the boire. That mitzad, the difference between the chiddush the first time in creation and the rest of the days of creation is mitzad Eibishter. That Kaviyachol, the first time, it takes an involvement of the Eibishter, and he can't do something else. Kaviyachol, whatever, however we're going to tie Pshat of the Medrash. And then following that, because it's Chiddush HaYishanos, the Eibishter has time to make Shidduchim. So that means that the difference between the first and the following times is mitzad the involvement of the Beira, of the Eibishter. When the Eibishter creates something for the very first time, that's an expression of one type of Hamshacha. It's one type of Kayach of the Eibishter. When the Eibishter creates something that already existed before, so the difference is not only mitzad the Nivra, that it has its nature, but the difference is also mitzad the Beira. Because he's creating something that already existed the moment before, it's not expressing the same power. It's not the same hamshacha. That's the lashon of the Maim here. It's not the same hamshacha. Eina oisa oifen hamshacha k'may shaya b'sheish yismei bereishis.
He's saying that the first 6 days when it came out, that was the kli itself, the Eish Hamiti is creating the Eish Nivra, which is the kli, even though it also has an or in it, but it's a kli. After the Sheish Me'Bereishis, the or Ein Sof is the thing that continues because it's Me'ein Amor. Maybe that's the point here. Because the or Ein Sof, that's the whole.
Right.
That's the whole
So I'm trying to explain or Me'ein Amor.
So it is involving of the Eibishter, but it's also the or Ein Sof, which is creating the Ein Sof within the Bria.
Can sein. Could be. Okay, I'm just pointing out the pshat and what the Rebbe is saying here. We're mamish in the middle, but we'll continue Mitzvah tomorrow. We'll finish off this subject over here. Okay.
Just already opened up a can of worms. Unbelievable.
When the Maim Basi Legani Tovshin Chav Beis, we're middle of Seif Hey. We have to finish here the paragraph, the second paragraph of Seif Hey on page Yud Ches. The Rebbe is speaking about the fact that you see Nitzchias in the existence of Nivraim. Primarily, you see it when you get to the Tzvar Shamayim. You see how every single star and so on that exists there remains strong as it was Kiyayim Hi Baram. And you also see this union of Bli Gvul in the Tzva Ha'aretz. You have the Kayach HaTzimeach in the world, even though in actuality it grows things that are limited. There's a number of how much things exist in the world, and things don't remain forever, and then there's other things that grow, but nevertheless you can see that there's a Kayach HaTzimeach that's Bli Gvul in the world, which means there has to be, the maskan of the Rebbe is, there has to be a Kayach in the Nivrayim that's Bli Gvul. Why? What's the raya? The Rebbe said there's a klal. You could never have a Kayach of Bli Gvul contained by something which is limited. Can't contain it. So if the Nivrayim have in it a nature of Bli Gvul that we can see, it must be that the Nivrayim have in them a Kayach of Bli Gvul. So the Rebbe over here asked a question. Spoke about it yesterday, Barichis, but the way we learned it yesterday, I left off with a question, that what the Rebbe is saying here is hard to understand, what the Rebbe wants to say. So really, the Rebbe's question here is as follows. The Rebbe says, we know that there's a koyach havus b'chol rega. The Rebbe recreates the world every single moment. So now, if so, the question is, who says that the Nivrayim have inside of them a koyach of Bli Gvul? Maybe the fact that they're Bli Gvul is mitzad this koyach havus. The fact that the Rebbe recreates everything every single moment. And this koyach havus is not necessarily something which is mislabish inside the Nivra, that the mitzias of the Nivra itself has in it a koyach of Bli Gvul. There's a koyach havus. The fact that the Eibusha creates the Nivra every single moment, does that define the Nivra itself? That's not the Nivra itself. There's a koyach havus that the Eibusha creates it. What's the Nivra itself? The Nivra itself is a being that exists with its nature. The koyach havus, it says that the koyach havus is a koyach makif. It's not something which identifies the very Nivra itself. So over here, when we're talking about this nature that a Nivra has, that we could see that it's Bli Gvul. Who says that this shows that there's an inyan inside the Nivraim themselves, that it has in it the chayas that's inside the Nivra, there's an inyan of Bli Gvul here, that Eirein Seifa Bli Gvul reaches so far that the Nivraim themselves are Bli Gvul? Maybe not. Maybe it's just a koyach havus. Mitzad that it's Bli Gvul. That's the Rebbe's question here. For that, the Rebbe answered that this koyach havus, that the Eibusha created the world in the first time, Sheish Yismei Bereishis, it's not the same hamshacha, it's not the same koyach every single day, every single moment when that koyach havus continues. And the Rebbe brought the raya from what it says in the Medrash. In the Medrash, it's actually Rabbi Yosi. Checked it up yesterday. There was someone that asked Rabbi Yosi, what does the Eibusha do from after the 6 days of creation? The Eibusha is not working and creating anymore. So yeah, it's the Eibusha's Yeshu from Mezavik Zivugim. But the Eibusher creates the world every single moment. Elamai, it must be that hamshacha of koyach hasavos is one time. The hamshacha afterwards, the Eibusher does not continue. So if you want to know mitzad, that type of hamshacha, that type of busyness, so to speak, that there was in the 6 days of creation, where does the Eibusher express that type of koyach of hasavos? He expresses it through yeshiv u'mezavik zivugim. Maybe the pshat over here is, the Rebbe doesn't explain here, but it says b'chlal and chassidus b'negei to yeshiv u'mezavik zivugim. The Gemara says that it's similar to kriyas yamsuf. You're bringing together two people, and it's a chibur of two opposites that come together, just like hafach yom le'yabosha. It's bringing together two opposites. So this koyach hasavos, when the Eibusher creates yesh ma'ayin, the very first time, how is that inyan expressed after Sheshis and Mereshis? It's in the inyan of Yeshiv Mezavik Zivugim. But the Koyach HaSavos that there is B'chol Rega is not that type of Amshacha. Adarabba, afterwards it's called Chidush HaYeshanis, that the Eibusher is being Mechadish, something that already existed. So because we see that it's not the same type of Amshacha, so this Koyach HaSavos does not contain in it a Koyach that the Nivrayim should continue with the same Koyach Kiyemi Baram, that they should be strong Kiyemi Baram. It's a different type of Amshacha. And because it's a different type of Amshacha, the Nivrayim mitzad that Koyach would deteriorate, and there is no Koyach of Bligvol in the Nivrayim. So you can't attribute this Chazakim, Kiyemi Baram, to this Koyach HaSavos. It has to be that inside the Nivrayim themselves, there is a Koyach of Bligvol, and therefore the Chazakim Kiyemi Baram. That's the point that the Rebbe is saying here. Okay, I'm just touching the words, but there has to be a deeper avon over here to what the Rebbe is saying. Let's continue. We're just finishing the paragraph here on page Yud Ches V'Kivin. A couple of lines before the end of the paragraph. Kivin sh'anevrayim em chazakim kiyomi baram k'moi b'sheish yishimei b'reishis. Since we see that the Nevrayim are strong, and they do have the same power, the way they were on the day that they were created, k'moi b'sheish yishimei b'reishis, just like it was in Sheish Yishimei Bereishis, and that could not be attributed to the Koyach HaSavos, because the Koyach HaSavos does not have that Koyach today. It's a different type of Amshacha than it was in Sheish Yishimei Bereishis. So Elamai, what's this inyan of Bligvol that exists in the Nevrayim? Mitzad the Koyach HaSavos, it's Chidush HaYeshanis. It's not going to be Chazakim Kiyomi Badam. So it must be that the source of this Koyach of Bligvul that we see in Nevrayim is there's a Chayis, Bepnimius in the Nivra, and therefore the Nevrayim themselves are Bligvul. Koyach HaPoyel Benifal. The Koyach HaPoyel Benifal means that you have to have a Koyach that makes the Nifal, the Nevrayim themselves. It's that the Nevrayim themselves are Taka Inyan of Bligvul. It's not the Koyach HaSavos. What's the Koyach HaSavos? It's not a Koyach that identifies what the Chayis and the Metzias of the Nivra itself is. The Koyach HaSavos is that Koyach to create, that it should appear into Metzias, Yesh Ma'ayin, from nothingness into becoming a being. That's the Koyach HaSavos. But this Metzias that is created, what is it? What's its nature? How does it exist? How long does it exist for? That Koyach of the nature that it has is a different inyan. That's a koyach of chazakim kiyemi baram, and that indicates that there's a koyach of bligvol that's in everything. There's another place where the Rebbe says a similar word to this, that you see how the koyach of the essence of the Eibishter is here in this world. So Chassidus speaks about the inyan of teva. On one hand, teva shows in the fact that the world seems to be running and functioning on its own. That's the inyan of teva. And sometimes Chassidus says teva is meloshen tubu b'yamsuf, that the koyach of the Eibishter is so hidden here that it's like sunk in a way that you don't notice what's controlling this. It seems like the world is self-sufficient and it's functioning and it goes every day with the same routine. What's the emes? The fact that you have every single day the sun comes up in Mizrach, goes down in Ma'ariv, and everything runs with the same exact schedule to the clock, to the second, to the chulu, that's a raya that this comes from ani avaya lo shanisi. There's nothing that in the world that could be a source for such a kind of a steadiness, such a kind of fixed schedule that we see in the teva of the world, if not for the fact that it comes from ani avaya lo shanisi. So it's a similar thing. Over here the Rebbe is not talking about the steadiness of teva. Here the Rebbe is talking about the chazakim kiyemi baram that you see in the existence of the tzva shamayim. It's also a reflection of the koyach habligvul that there's here in the world. If there wouldn't be the investment of koyach habli gvul from the essence of the Eibishter here in the world, you would not have this inyan of bli gvul. Not mitzad any darga of giluyim. And the Rebbe here is adding, and also not mitzad the koyach ha'asavos. Even mitzad the koyach ha'asavos, it's also, this is not the inyan of chazak and kiyom yibaram. There has to be a koyach that the Eibishter puts into the Nevrayim that their nature should be, that whether it's aniyah v'aylo shenisi, or there's a koyach that it's chazak and kiyom yibaram. That's a, and where does this koyach come from? When we talk here about bli gvul, what are we talking about? We're talking about the emes of bli gvul that could only come from the Eibishter himself. Let's continue. The kivin, where am I? Behainud, meaning she'in the bli gvul nimshach b'shamayim u'baretz. So we see from all of this is that the koyach of bli gvul of the Eibishter, it comes into the Oyer. The Oyer itself is Ein Sof, and that Oyer Ein Sof is Lamata Adin Tachlis. It extends down to the lowest place. And you could see it here reflected in this world. B'shamayim, b'va'aretz, shem la'achrei atzimtzum. That is after tzimtzum, v'gam la'achrei elam atzilus, even outside of elam atzilus, and ba'elam is biyah, and va'ad lamata b'tachlis ba'elam asiyah. This koyach ein sof, this bli gvul, that the source of this and the nature of this bli gvul. What is this bli gvul? We're talking about the emes of bli gvul of the Eibishter himself. It's here. It's reflected in the nature of this world, the nature of chazak and kiyom yibar, and the way things exist here in this world. Messiah Basi, the Friedger Rebbe concludes the Sif Yud Beis. Here we have the Rebbe makes sort of a summary of the whole Inyan again, the whole Chiddush of Oyer Ein Sof. She calls the reason why I have a relation and a gilu of Oyer Ein Sof, Lamata Adin Tachlis, to the lowest place, Ulefisha ha'Oyer Ein Sof u'bli gvul. So the reason is because the Oyer itself is Ein Sof and bli gvul. As we started off this whole Inyan explaining at the beginning of the Inyan, why is the Oyer itself Ein Sof? Because the Oyer itself is like the Moyer. The word like, that's the literal translation of like, but me'ein, but it doesn't mean that at all. Oyer me'ein amor means that the Oyer is not something other than the Moyer. The Oyer is just a reflection of the Moyer. There is no two things over here, the source and then a certain hashpah that comes out of the source. That's usually the way every single hashpah works, shefa. Right? As we learned in the beginning of the Inyan, that Rebbe brought the difference between Oyer and shefa. When you have a certain shefa, so the shefa is a yirida from the source. It's not the same kind of thing that there is by the Rav himself, the darga of the seichel that he has. It's not the same darga. It has to leave his matzav and his world and the way he sees things on his level, and it comes down. Goes down a level. It's not. You can't say it's me'ein. Yeah, of course, it's comes from the Rav, and it's a certain level that. But it's b'chlal not be'erech. The depth of the seichel, the way it exists in the world of the Rav, and the depth of the seichel, the way it exists in the world of the Talmud, it's a tiny percent. It's very superficial. It got to be the truth of the real depth of what's going on by the Rav. So, obviously, if you want to use the term me'ein very loosely, and not the way he's trying to use the word me'ein over here, you'll say that every shefa, every time there's a hashpah, you look at the hashpah, it's me'ein of what's going on in the seichel of the Rav. If the Rav is teaching you Masechta Megillah, so the student is not going to hear that he's teaching you Masechta Yevamis. It's going to be me'ein in that sense. But if the Rav is a person that has an Havana and Be'ein Areich, the way he sees things in this Masechta, and then he's teaching the Talmud that same Masechta, and the Talmud is getting this subject, but he's getting it in a completely different type of a way, in the way that the kelim of the Seichel of the Talmud could take it. It's a huge Yerida. The Makabal is on a completely different level. That's not Me'ein. It's not called Me'ein, that's a Shefa. Mashenkin over here, what are we talking about? Oyer me'ein amor. Oyer me'ein amor is a completely different inyan. The oyer is b'chlal not inyan for itself. The moir is bli gvul, and the moir is open, the moir is nizgale, and b'derech memela, whatever the moir is in the oyer. That's the real touch of oyer me'ein amor. You read these words, and it doesn't really say the whole thing unless you have to the whole hemshech that Rebbe here brings from the Rebbe Rashab. Let's see. Moshe is bar le'el. So we learned this earlier. Because the oir is just a reflection of the moir itself. It's just an expression of what the moir is. So yesh by heder hamedide va'agbala betachlis. The emes inyan of bli gvul betachlis exists in the moir. What's this inyan of Heder, Medidah, V'Agbala, B'Tachlis? Just to review again this concept. Usually, when you talk about Bli Gvul is a description of something. It's a description of a certain existence. This existence is so great, it's so huge, it's so unbelievable that it's endless. It's an expression that Bli Gvul is explaining a certain Metzias. That's not the inyan of Bli Gvul by the Eibishter. The inyan of Bli Gvul by the Eibishter means the emes of Bli Gvul, meaning, no, you can't describe him. Even if you want to describe him by being Bli Gvul, that's not a description. Because he's not limited to anything. He doesn't have to be in any way. He doesn't have to be an Eifin of Gvul. He doesn't have to be an Eifin of Bli Gvul. So if you want to say the words Bli Gvul, ba mitosai, Bli Gvul means he has takano Gvul. Including this, that you want to describe him as Bli Gvul. That's the emes inyan of Bli Gvul b'tachlis. That's what the Rabbi is saying here. That koyach, that emes inyan of Bli Gvul, that he doesn't have to be in any way, that koyach comes out in the Oyer. Is reflected in the Metzias of the Oyer, which is a tremendous chiddush. And as we learned already earlier in the Maimer, that this even goes a step further. Even this inyan of Ein Le'ila V'Sibba, the Eibishter himself, that nothing is machriach him to be one way or another, there's nothing that causes his being. So he is be'etzem, which means that the Eibishter himself is a completely different type of Metzias. The Lashon that's always brought in Chassidus, based on the Lashon of the Rambam, is there's a Metzias Nimtza, there's a Metzias that has a description to its Metzias, something caused it to be. So its whole Metzias is defined by what caused it to be. Or you have a Metzias, nothing causes it. It is Ba'etzem. Something that is Ba'etzem, he has to be. He has to exist Ba'etzem mitzad who he is. So that's a completely different type of Metzias. Ein Le'ila V'Sibba. So the Oyer, what's Oyer? Oyer has a source. Oyer is being caused and is a gilu that comes from the Moyer. So if it's a revelation from the Moyer, so it's a Metzias. It's a certain Metzias that comes out of the Moyer. Is Oyer something that has to be? There has to be Oyer? Well, it doesn't have to be Oyer. L'mayla, if the Eibishter decides there should be Oyer, then there's Oyer. Everything's beratzin l'mayla. You don't have to have Oyer. The Eibishter decided that there should be an expression from himself. So there's a Metzias that the Eibishter created that's called Oyer. Obviously, the Metzias that the Eibishter created as Oyer is not the Metzias of a Yesh, of a Nivra. It's a Lakost, it's an expression of the Eibishter. But still, what is this Oyer? Oyer is a Metzias that the Eibishter expressed himself. So you can't say about the Oyer itself, Ein Le'ila V'Sibba. How can you say Ein Le'ila V'Sibba? The Oyer is just a Ha'ara. It's a ray of light from the source. But nevertheless, because the Oyer is not a certain Mohos Davar, it's not a Shefa, it's not a percent, a Chelik of something of Ashpa, it's the Makir itself that's just open. And when Mela, that Gili comes out, so therefore, what's this Oyer? The Oyer will have in it a full reflection of the nature of the Moyer. If the Moyer itself is Be'emes Bli Gvul, you'll see that reflected in the Oyer. If the Moyer itself, Ein Le'ila V'Sibba, is a type of Metzias, that nothing causes it, he is Ba'etzem, you'll see that koyach of Ein Le'ila V'Sibba in the Oyer itself. That's the inyan of Oyer Mein Amar, just to chazer again over this concept over here.
Just that everything's by Ratzon, that has a Sibba, the Rebbe, so there's desire to emanate it, that didn't.
Yeah, correct. So the Oyer has a Sibba and a Chanami. Nevertheless, even though it has a Sibba, it still has in it also the koyach of Ein Le'ila V'Sibba from the Eibishter himself. He's not saying chas v'shalom that the Oyer itself is Ein Le'ila V'Sibba. Of course it has a Sibba. But nevertheless, because the Oyer is not a Metzias of a Shefa, Elamai, what is Oyer? Oyer is the Moyer itself. That's really what Oyer is when the Oyer itself is Begili. So the Moyer is Memela. So therefore, the Oyer has in it that koyach of Ein Le'ila V'Sibba as well. Just to remind you a second, let's learn a little bit further inside, and maybe I'll try to explain it a little bit more. So this is the source of this whole inyan, where it's explained by Riches, is in the Maimer from the Rebbe Rashab and Tafir Samach Vav, and the Maimer, the famous Maimer Vayelach Havayis Hayam, and the Maimer that follows it afterwards, which I believe is the Maimer Zeis Chukas. So there, the Rebbe Rashab explains this inyan by Riches. This expression, this term, Oyer Ein Sof, is the words over here contradict each other. What is Oyer? Oyer is not Bechlal a Metzias, it's nothing. What is it? Do you have a percent of the Moyer here? Do you have a chelik of the Moyer here? No. Ha'ara Balma means you have nothing of the Moyer. When you have ashpa, when you use the term shefa, what does shefa mean? There's a certain chelik of what exists in the source, certain percent that you have. Yeah, it could be taka, you have a very small percent, a very little bit of it, very minimized, very diminished in its level, from a mashpia to a makabel. So it has to leave the way it is in its intensity in the source, and it comes down to a much lower place, to the level of the makabel. But the makabel has something. By ha'ara, what's ha'ara? You have something of the moir. Chassidus always brings the famous raya, that what happens when you take away the sun? The light is gone. It doesn't exist. There's no such a thing of the light without the source being there, present. Mashenki, when it comes to shefa, when you have the ashpal that came from one place to another, earlier in the beginning of the Maimon, the Rebbe brought even begashmis. You have shifas mayim, you have water that wasn't the source of the mayon, the wellspring, and it comes out to a new place. So the water that left the source where it was, and it arrived to a new location, it's not dependent every single moment on the source being there. Adarabah. The whole point is that there's the way it is in the makir. And then there's a yirida. It leaves the market, it comes out, and it comes to a new location. It's not connected to the market constantly. That's the union of a shefa. What's a ha'ara? A ha'ara is that there is nothing other than the moir here. The moment you take away the moir, the source, the oir is gone. There's no existence of oir b'chlal. So the chayre, you have nothing of the moir. That's on one hand. Ha'ara ba'alma. So you're going to come and say there's a mitzias, and I'm identifying what the maila of this mitzias is, that it has a maila, that it is ein soif. How could you say such a thing? There's nothing here. It's in a way it's even less than shefa. If you want to look at it like that, is there what is there as a mitzias over here? Much less than shefa, and still you're calling this ein soif. How could you call it ein soif? Hainu. So what's the taich of ein soif? That this is a oir that it could be mispashit, it could extend, that it could go to every single level endlessly. But if there's nothing here other than the mar, so what are you giving a title of Ein Sof to? That's the lashon of oir. So oir, Ein Sof is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. What is it? There's a oir. If you just read the words the way it sounds superficially, you're saying there's a metzias of oir, and this metzias of oir is Ein Sof. That's not the way to teach it. It's not true. You must say that this oir does have a soif. Why? Because it starts from somewhere. You can't say that the oir doesn't start from anywhere. That it doesn't have a source. The oir means that it's a revelation of a source. So behechrech that it has a soif b'tchilas in yanei. It has a cause and a source of what causes it, what comes before it, and what brings it into being. Eibishter decided that he wants to be mizgala. He wants to be in an oifen that's begili. If the Eibishter would decide that he does not want to be begili, does it in any way diminish the Eibishter's being? He is. The Eibishter is betzim, whether he's begili, whether he's not begili. Okay. Baloshin shaharei, when someone says shaharei ha'or nimtza ma'amor, the oir comes from the moir. Baloshin arama mipano, the lashon that the Rama mipano says, b'negei alinyan Hashem, when it comes to the name of the Eibishter, Shabal Hashem, the Eibishter himself, which is the Baal Hashem, the one that carries this name, Kodam L'Shem, he comes before the name itself. So the very fact that you use the term name means that there's someone that carries the name. So the same thing goes to B'negei to oir. The fact that there's the oir means that there's a moir, there's the source of the oir. So how could you say that the oir itself is ein soif l'spashtusa, that the oir is ein soif? It's not be'emes ein soif. If it has a tchila, if it has a beginning, so it means it's a defined metzias. If it's a defined metzias, so if it has a definition in the way it starts and how its metzias came into being, so it has to have also a soif. That's the klal. The emes inyan of ein soif is only by something that l'chatchila has absolutely no definition whatsoever. The Eibishter's Metzias, one page Yotes. The Eibishter's Metzias is not defined in any way, so therefore the Eibishter's Be'emes Ein Sof. In the sense that there's taka no tire for the Eibishter. There's nothing could describe him. He's l'chatchila not defined b'chlal. But if you're talking about oir, which has a tchila, has a makir, so how could you say that there's an inyan of Ein Sof here? So that's on one hand. So the oir itself is nothing. It's not a Metzias b'chlal. You can't say that the oir is ein soif. But yet at the same time, what do we say? What's Oyer? The Oyer is Meina Moyer. The Oyer is a reflection of the Moyer itself. It's like the Moyer itself. Shemitzad zeh yesh bei gam. And because of this, because the Oyer is like the Moyer itself, so not only, the Rebbe goes straight to not only does the Oyer have in it the Koyach of Ein Sof, and you could say that the Oyer is Ein Sof, but Shemitzad zeh yesh bei gam hashlilas ein the yesh leitchila. It even has in it also the Koyach that says that there's no tchila to me. I don't have a certain tchila where I started. Adarabba, I'm chatchila not a metzias for myself. The oyer is something which is just a reflection of the metzias of the mar. Shilchein yachaliyas al yada yishavas abriya yesh ma'ayin kanal. This is the explanation of the Alter Rebbe why the creation of yesh ma'ayin comes from oyer. The koyach to create yesh ma'ayin could only come from the essence of the Eibishter himself, and the oyer is the source of creation. How does oyer have a koyach to create yesh ma'ayin? Because the oyer is not a metzias for itself. So what's the nekuda that? So how do we explain this? On one hand, the oyer is a ha'ara ba'alma. The oyer is b'chlal not a metzias for itself. Adarabba, the oyer for sure has a ilu v'siba. The Eibishter himself decided it should be oyer. And on the other hand, what are we saying? No, the oyer itself has in it a koyach of Ein Sof, and it even has the koyach of Ein Leitchila. So how can we say this? So the nekuda of the explanation is sha'oyer mitzad atzmai hu omnam rak oyer v'ara bulvad. If you want to identify the oyer for itself, for what it is, the answer is going to be that it's just light. It's just a revelation. It's a ray from the source. It's nothing on its own. So if you want to talk about the quality of what the oyer itself is, it's taka nothing. The moment you remove the source, the sun, you don't have any ray, you don't have any light. You can't have a metzias of light without the source. So it's a ha'ara bulvad. Ulamayla yaiseh kifi shenikra shem bulvad. Or even a higher way of expressing this concept, it's like a name. A name is in a way even deeper than a ray. A ray is an expression that you use for something that sof a ray is episometzias besides the source. A name, if there's nobody to give this name to, so the name is pointless. There is no such a thing as name. You can't say this metzias of Reuven, and then we attach that name to the person. I'm not talking about the letters of Reuven. I'm talking about the whole concept of a name is to identify someone. So if there's no person that you're identifying, so there's no name. The emes inyan of a name is also not a metzias for itself, b'chlal. And even higher than this, l'mayla yaiseh kifi shenikra b'shem yechaylas. In Chassidus, it speaks about a term that's even higher than the concept of Shem, Yechaylas. The Yechaylas that Eibishter has, the possibilities, the potential, the koyach. Okay, this term Yechaylas is a whole long maimer in Samach Vav that explains what this inyan of Yechaylas is. Yechaylas is it's nothing outside of the essence of the Eibishter himself. Haval b'Yechaylas, yeshtam kol anyanim shabatzmas. In this Yechaylas, you have everything of the essence of the Eibishter himself. The term Yechaylas and the essence of the Eibishter himself is one and the same thing. So therefore, Oyer, because it's not a separate entity of the Eibishter himself, so the Oyer has in it the inyan of la b'choshbon. Heder amadidu v'agbala, no limitation whatsoever. It even has in it the koyach of ein leitchila she'ein le ila v'sibah shekad malay. Okay, we'll go over this. We'll go over this again tomorrow. Just to explain one more time this inyan. We'll explain one more time what this means over here. This inyan of oyer. This is mamish, one of the most fundamental inyanim in Chassidus. This musag of oyer. Once you get the musag of oyer right, so then everything else in Chassidus could flow. Try to do it one more time tomorrow, Mitzvah.